So what will be happening here is really just switching back and forth between the types of pathways that I've talked about. So we want to talk about Parkinson. So in Parkinson's disease, what is happening is that you have difficulties in initiating movement. So number one, you have difficulty in initiating movement. And then you also see a form of rigidity as well as resting tremors. What causes it is we have a degeneration of neurons in the pars compacta. So we're looking at the substantia nigra and dopamine being low. Right? So what we're going to do is we're simply going to look at what's the effect of low dopamine in the direct pathway and what's the effect of low dopamine in the indirect pathway. So by now, you will know that what I'm going to discuss is really what I was discussing in the first video that did not have dopamine, but we're still going to do that. So this is, again, striatum, GPI, E, and then thalamus. All right? So now what's happening is you have a reduced amount of dopamine coming from here. So if you have a reduced amount of dopamine coming from here, it means the enhancement has been lifted off. So you will have a thought happen there. You have glutamate released onto the striatum. And then you're going to have GABA released onto the internus. And once you have that, you're going to have inhibition of GABA in the thalamus, and so there will be less GABA. If there's less GABA, it means that you are not inhibiting this pathway as much, and so there will be stimulation. So if you're reducing dopamine, it means that enhanced release of GABA that was happening in the GPI is not there, and so the enhancement of this pathway. All right. So if you remember, we had it coming here, and there was more stimulation. So more stimulation here meant more GABA. And more GABA in here meant even further reduced GABA. Okay, so this was further, and the further reduced GABA is the one that led to wanted movement even more. Okay, and so if you remove the dopamine, you're just remaining with the normal pathway that we had talked about in the first videos without the enhancement from dopamine. So what will happen in this case is, because you're not enhancing, you will notice that the lack of enhancement, will lead to difficulties in initiating movement, only because you don't have something to exaggerate what the direct pathway is doing. Can the direct pathway do it on its own? It seems to be more amplified when there's dopamine in play. So you see that the difficulty in initiating movement is very valid in this case. The next thing you're going to see is what is happening in the indirect pathway. Let me see if I can draw it right here. No, let's see. Yeah. So in the indirect pathway, what we're going to see is, remember what was happening in the indirect pathway is we were trying to increase facilitatory movement. So in this case, if we reduce dopamine, what we're expecting is the facilitatory movements will also be reduced. So what we have here is the cortex, and then striatum. We have GPI, E, and then we have our thalamus. We also have our subthalamus, and we have our substantia nigra. So first of all, we have our thought motor cortex. We have the striatum that is stimulated, and then the stimulation will lead to more GABA in the externa. When there's more GABA in the externa, we see that there's less GABA in the subthalamus. Less GABA in the subthalamus will imply more glutamate in the internas. When there's more glutamate in the internas, we see that there will be even more GABA in the thalamus. If there's more GABA in the thalamus, it means that we won't have much stimulation going on. This is the normal. And we saw that the role of dopamine was to reduce the GABA that is being produced in the externa. And if there is less glutamate, if there's less GABA, I beg your pardon, it means that there will be more GABA here. And if there's more GABA here, it means that this will be inhibited. And if there's less glutamate here, it means that there will be less GABA here, because nothing is exciting the pallidothalamo. Once there's reduction of GABA there, it means that you will see some activity occurring between the thalamus and the cortex, and so there will be some facilitatory movement. So if you now come in and remove this, it means that you're removing this effect, and there will be an increase in GABA there. If there's an increase in GABA there, you see that there is reduction in GABA. And because there's a reduction in GABA there, you see that there's more glutamate. And because of more glutamate, you see that then we have increased GABA. And increased GABA will mean no movement. So it will mean no facilitatory movement at all. So again, it goes back to difficulties in initiating movement. So what type of movement? Both wanted plus facilitatory. Okay, so that's what we're looking at. Then we get to notice that the cortical reticular and reticulospinal control, we see that these two are linked. The cortical reticular fibers seem to control reticulospinal activity. What does the reticulospinal do? So the reticulospinals, they control tone in the muscle. So the cortical reticular fibers So corticoreticular fibers are there to inhibit this area, reticulospinal. All right. So they inhibit these tracts, and this is just there for regulation. Now, what happens is with reduction in dopamine, you see that the inhibition of these reticulospinal tracts also reduces. And because the regulation has reduced, you see that there are action potentials that are sent to both the flexors and the extensors. And because of this, you'll find that these individuals are rigid. Okay, so that explains rigidity. The next one that must be explained is within the striatum. Within the striatum, you find that we have reverberating arcs. Okay, now these reverberating arcs, remember we had what are those? They're arcs that release SEH. Now these pathways become really fast during rest, and you see that if dopamine is reduced, they're left unchecked, and so because they become really fast, they may throw out action potentials to the pathways. And once they throw out those action potentials, you find that even at rest, flexors, extensors as well are sent, provided with the action potentials, and you find that you have what are known as resting tremors. Okay, so that is Parkinson's. In the next video, we'll be looking at Huntington disease.